I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, August 21st meeting of the Development Review Board. And for this meeting, I would normally preside, but I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm going to turn over those duties to my colleague, John Day. But that does not mean I will not comment or ask questions. John, it's all yours.
Okay, so just to amplify that a little bit, the hierarchy of chairs is the chairman, who's not here tonight, the vice chair, my colleague who's losing his voice, and the clerk, which is me. So I ran slowest and I got tagged with the meeting. So forgive me if I am not as practiced as my two senior colleagues. So the meeting having been called to order, I'm just going to follow the agenda as typewritten. So the first issue is there any public comment on topics not on the agenda? Comments on items that are on the agenda will welcome at the time those items are addressed. Okay, hearing none. That brings us to approval of minutes. We actually have 2 minutes to approve. I sent an email with respect to the first one to the board and Ravi. I don't know whether everybody's seen it yet, but the short version is that a participant in the July 17th meeting made a suggestion for additions to the minutes, basically something that they said and my response to it. I have no reason to doubt the accuracy of what they say they said. I would like to confirm my response to it, and normally I would have been able to do that during the day by looking at the video and quickly come up with an answer. My power came on at 5:30 this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to do that. So I'm going to suggest whatever the rest of the board thinks is appropriate. One is, which would be my first preference, is that we address these minutes at our next regularly scheduled meeting. I'll have looked at the video by then, and I'll either agree to the proposal, or if I have an objection to it, I can articulate what it is. The other is we can approve the minutes without adding the additional language. That's not my first choice, because if somebody said something and they think it should be reflected in the minutes, I'm fine with that, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I suggest we just push it to the next meeting.
I make a motion that we move that item to our next regularly scheduled meeting.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. With respect to the minutes of August 17th, 2019, are there any suggestions for changes or modifications?
You mean August 7th?
Sorry, August 7th.
I don't have any.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt the minutes as written? Okay. Okay, motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Is there any board member who needs to disclose, to recuse themselves from any matter that we're hearing tonight because they have a conflict of interest? Is there any member of the public here tonight that has a concern about any board member here tonight participating in a matter due to a conflict of interest? Okay, hearing no disclosures from board members and no requests from the public, we will treat that matter as closed and no one will be recused. Next, application DR 19-12, application by 41 Falls Road LLC for design review for exterior repairs and improvement. And instead of reading the rest of the squib, I'll ask Ravi to take us through the matter from the staff's perspective. Oh, I'm sorry. I appreciate my senior colleague giving me guidance. If there's anyone who hasn't, please sign in. That sounds a little anal, but if we can't hear your name clearly when we look at the video and are generating the minutes, we look at the sign-in list to see who's here. So it's very helpful if you'll sign in if you haven't already. That having said,
We also have to open it up for public comment on anything not on the agenda.
I did that.
We did? Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
We're good on that.
Okay.
So item number 5, DR 19, Ravi, what do we got?
So this is the applicant seeking design review approval for improvements to the building at 41 Falls Road to include new windows, architectural shingle, and metal roofing, gutters, and decking on the front porch, as well as repairs to the siding and trim. The Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission reviewed this application during their August 8th, 2019 meeting and voted to approve this item, recommended to approve this item during their August 15th, 2019 meeting with the condition that a zoning permit shall be required prior to the commencement of construction. Staff has no concerns to note about this application. At this point, staff will defer to the applicant.
Is the applicant here and willing to speak? Sure. Okay, so I'll need to swear you in first. Can you state your name for the record?
I am Philip Charlebois. I'm the owner of the property.
Okay.
So
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Okay, please proceed.
So basically, we want to complete some necessary repairs and improvements on the building, and we want to try to preserve as much character, original character as we can. We also want to do it in an efficient manner because it is a commercial property for us. Basically, starting with the roof down, replacing the roof, much needed replacement of the roof on the main part of the building, and painting windows and getting rid of the awnings, which have been bugging us for some time. And lastly, improving the bay windows, giving some separation there to give it a more authentic and historical look. So again, just much needed repairs.
Okay, any questions by the board?
I have none.
Okay, is there a member of the public who'd like to speak on this matter one way or the other? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Is someone prepared to make a motion?
Sure, I make a motion to approve application DR 19-12 for one condition that a zoning permit shall be obtained prior to commencement of work.
Is there a second?
Second.
There were numerous seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passed. The next matter is application DR 19-13, application by Russell Shapiro for design review to replace basement windows and window wells, property at 203 Harbor Road situated in the Village Residential District, Village Design Review Overlay District, and Stormwater Overlay District. Ravi, will you give the staff's summary of this for us, please?
This is a applicant seeking design review approval for 6 replacement larger basement windows and new window wells at the property at 203 Harbor Road. Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission reviewed the applicant's request and recommended to approve this application during their August 8, 2019 meeting with the condition that a zoning permit be required prior to the commencement of construction. Staff has no concerns to note about this request. At this point, staff will defer to the applicant.
Is the applicant here? Okay. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Yeah, I'm Jerry Fisher, sitting in here for Russell Shapiro.
Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration is the whole truth, nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
He wants to just make 6 windows bigger in the front of his house, like 12 inches difference in the height, not the width, and put window wells in and for more air in the basement because he has a moisture problem.
Any questions by any member of the board? None. Any member of the public have a comment or question in connection with this matter? Thank you for your testimony. Does a member of the board wish to make a motion?
Yeah. Motion is made to grant design review approval to the Russell Shapiro DR 19-13 for 6 replacement basement windows and new window wells with the following condition: that a zoning permit shall be required prior to the commencement of construction.
Is there a second for the motion? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Passed unanimously. Application CU 19-09/SP 19-08. Application of Dream Come True LLC for conditional use and site plan review for a change in use to building materials sales use. property at 3910 Shelburne Road, located in the mixed-use district and the Stormwater Overlay District. Ravi, will you walk us through the staff summary?
Yeah, so the applicant seeking a change in use from existing retail uses. The property used to be a furniture store, so it has been classified as a retail use for decades. And the applicant seeks to operate building material sales with all indoor storage at the location. The applicant is not considering any changes to the exterior of the building or any changes to the circulation of the building, parking amount, no physical changes whatsoever to the exterior. So the only thing that staff has noted is that the parking area does not have a bicycle rack yet. With under section 960.4, 2 bicycle parking spaces must be provided on site. Staff recommends that the board put forward the condition of approval requiring the applicant to submit site plans that include a location of a bicycle rack. Otherwise, staff will defer to the applicant.
Let me interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
Do you have a comment to make on the screening on the northern and western boundaries?
No, staff finds that sufficient at the moment.
So as I understand it, the DRB could choose to include restrictions to restrict tree cutting, but the staff's view is that the present situation is sufficient.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant present? Can you state your name for the record, please?
Tony Wayne.
And do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Why don't you walk us through the proposal?
Where did I start? I'm representing Dream Come True LLC, trying to getting applying for a retail use to a building sales material use. So currently, we running a kitchen showrooms on South Burlington on Wollaston Road, which is a retail use, and we don't have the issue of getting to building material use. So now we're moving back to Shelburne because I live in Shelburne. I'm a Shelburne resident. So that's why we get this place here, try to be close at home, and now it's from a furniture use to a cabinet showroom use. So it's still a retail. So just wanna applying the Shelburne law with the bylaw, so we have to go into this whole process.
Excuse me, any questions by a board member?
No.
Any member of the any member of the public wish to comment or ask a question in connection with this matter? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Is there a board member who wishes to make a motion?
Sure. I would make a motion to first close the hearing and finalize the record. And secondly, I would move to direct staff to prepare a decision indicating approval of this conditional use review and site plan application, CU 1909 and SP 19-08. With the two conditions: one, that a zoning permit is obtained before any work begins, and secondly, that the applicant includes a bike rack on their site plan pursuant to section 1960.4.
Is there a second for the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously passed. Next on the agenda is, here's what I'm looking for. Application SUB 19-03, which is a continuation from a prior proceeding. Ravi, I understand,
That's being continued again, isn't it?
well, but it's listed on the agenda, so I'm stating
Oh,
out loud
sorry.
that we're not hearing it.
Sorry.
That's okay. Very efficient. So I'm assuming without objection, we can continue this to the, was there a specific date that we were requested? Or is it just be till the regularly scheduled meeting?
Get the calendar going here,
I believe that would be October 16th.
Well, is there a limit to how long, now that we're talking about this, to how long we just keep continuing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not
Okay,
that,
so we just,
yeah, until the applicant chooses to withdraw, or at this point, the applicant, I'm not sure if the applicant is, or their representative is present. So it would automatically be continued.
okay, very good.
16th is the second meeting in October. So that being said, I would make a motion to continue application SUB 19-03 to our next meeting at October 16th.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, application, SUB 19-11. Application of Civil Engineering Associates, Inc. on behalf of William Christine Griffin for sketch plan review to create a 9-lot subdivision property at 537 Thompson Road located in the residential district and Stormwater Overlay District. Will you walk us through this, please, Robbie?
So this is a proposal for a 9-lot subdivision close to the end of Thompson Road, as shown on the projector behind me. Currently the property is 15.04 acres. Along with the 9 lots that are being proposed, the applicant also proposes setting aside about 2.65 acres as open space. Because it's a 9-lot subdivision, staff recommends that the DRB classifies this as a major subdivision. In terms of density, the maximum amount of units that this property can hold per the requirements of the residential district is 32. So staff has no concerns about density in that matter. The only concern that staff has noted is that suitable hardwood shade trees have not been depicted on both sides of the private road. Per section 810 subpoint 4 of the subdivision regulations, staff recommends that a preliminary plan would include a landscaping plan with hardwood shade trees on both sides of the public road. At this point, staff will defer to the applicant.
Is the applicant present? Or a representative of the applicant? Yes.
Sorry, Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates.
Okay, thank you, Dave. You're well-known. Do you swear to or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in this cause under consideration shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Very good. I think Ravi did a fine job introducing this particular project at where the Griffins currently live. This is their existing home, and basically, again, 15 acres where at the end of Thompson Road, at the intersection with Cedar Ridge. One of the things that this application is proposing to do is actually to formalize and to create a T intersection here. One of the recent changes in the traffic circulation in this area was the introduction of a stop sign to basically get this particular traffic to stop and allow the existing residents in this particular area, as well as this home, to be able to access Thompson Road and not have to worry too much about those particular individuals coming down the road. So it is an improved situation, but this application basically seeks to create a more formalized intersection that basically will allow all people to be looking at each other's eyes as they come to the stop situation, and then basically to move out of there. Here, we've identified preliminarily the existing wetlands on the property. So there's a Class 2 wetland that's been identified along this particular drainage corridor that runs from south to north. And there are a number of other Class 3 wetlands that are smaller and less of significance on the property. These will be formally delineated as part of a preliminary plat application. But nonetheless, the application does propose a cul-de-sac that will service a number of different house sites within the property. The forested area basically occupies the eastern third of the property, in which a portion of the forested area was removed for the house. There is a prominent pond that is a very nice aesthetic as far as this particular area, and we're looking to allow a number of the homes to look into that pond as part of the planning of the project. Relative to buffering to the neighbor to the south, we're proposing this particular area that ultimately will either be dedicated open space, or it may be a boundary line adjustment to the neighbor where we would like to continue those discussions as far as how they would like to control that particular section of the road. But again, here
The existing driveway comes down off of Thompson Road, and we're basically running parallel to that and then working our way out between some of the treed section of this particular drainage corridor and then ending up in the field. There's some other forested areas that are primarily ledge outcrops that have not been mowed and therefore have grown up in trees. And there's also a little bit of secondary growth in this particular location. Looking to retain most of those particular features as screening between the proposed house sites. And as far as water is concerned, these will be private wells in this particular location. And then as far as municipal sewer, similar to what the Lisserog project did a little bit further down on Thompson Road, where they have a low pressure force main that ties into the gravity system on Irish Hill Road. We would be doing the same thing as far as a force main that basically would collect all of the flows from the proposed and existing lots and basically convey them down Thompson Road. And we're in discussions with Lisrogs about connecting into their infrastructure as a way of trying to be as efficient as possible. Chris Robinson has asked us from the sewer department to basically make sure that the sizing of the force main would be such that if any other neighbors in the area that find that their on-site wastewater disposal opportunities are challenged, whether it be replacement systems or the like, that they have the opportunity to utilize that same infrastructure also. So that's kind of the project in a nutshell, and I think not sure what to add beyond what Ravi already provided as far as an introduction. But we're open to questions.
Any questions or comments by the board? Ravi, any particular points that you wish to draw our attention to beyond the ones already made?
Not at the moment, Chair.
I think the staff recommendation is good. I think the subdivision regulations themselves require a very onerous requirement on the applicant to prepare very detailed plans in regards to all of the infrastructure that's required to support the project, and hence the future application will be much thicker than what you have today.
Is there any member of the public that has a question or would like to comment on this? Okay. As I recognize each of you, remember the first thing we need to do is have you state your name, and then I need to swear you in.
William Ryerson, 489 Thompson Road, right south of this property.
Okay. That's very helpful, giving your location. Thank you. Do you hereby swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in this cause under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Okay. Please proceed.
Because we're next to the property, we took particular interest in the location of the road. By my measurement, the roadway is about 20 feet off of the turnaround in our property. Currently, there's a large wooded area between the two houses, and by my estimation, a lot of those existing mature trees would be destroyed by the road. So we made a request to Bill Griffin that he consider moving the roadway or swinging it north in order to preserve the existing woods to the extent possible. There's probably, in my opinion, no necessity to have a four-way intersection because traffic is all likely to turn south on Thompson Road because going across onto Cedar Ridge Road, there's no outlet. So at any rate, but more important than where the intersection is where the roadway runs as it's going by the north side of our house. Second, one of our neighbors asked us to find out if there's any estimate on what 9 houses would do to the water table, since all of these houses would be affected or would be using well water. So that's really just an open question.
Dave, what's the most organized way of doing this? Do you want to respond speaker by speaker, or do you want to have all the questions and then get up and do it all?
perhaps we will respond while it's still fresh in everybody's minds.
think
We
that's-
will be looking at how to improve the buffering between the proposed roadway and the property to the south. And with regard to water usage, that is regulated by the state of Vermont with regard to what the demand on the aquifer will be. And we'll comply with those particular rules set forth by the public water supply rules as well as the wastewater management rules. So that's a quick answer.
Did I understand you to say earlier that the four-way intersection had previously been approved?
I had indicated that there was a stop sign for the southwesterly traffic
Okay.
on Cedar Ridge. So that was a change in the recent history. And then all we're trying to do is basically bring everybody into a formal. Engineers love orthogonal intersections. And of course, traffic engineers really like them just because of the way that they allow people to come together and observe each other's movements. As you start to skew the roadways at more of an angle, it becomes more challenging for people to be looking over their shoulder and observing the conditions. So that's what we're proposing to do at this particular point. This is something that we'll continue to work with Paul Goodrich on as far as those particular thoughts.
And Chair, if I may, urban planners also like four-way intersections as well. So according to section 920 of our subdivision regulations, that we wouldn't want to inadvertently create street jogs or misaligned intersections in order to basically reduce the amount of possible turns and accidents.
Okay, before we go to the next participant witness, any other board questions or comments on this aspect?
No.
Okay, next person who wishes to speak.
My name is Lita Finch. I'm married to Bill Ryerson. We're at 489 Thompson Road.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration will be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So my husband has already expressed some concerns. My concern is the number of cars there. That is not a four-way intersection. It's virtually a dead-ended intersection because Thompson Road doesn't go very far beyond the house that is sitting there at that corner. So we have one outlet. When you go up Thompson Road and you turn right onto Cedar Ridge, there's a cul-de-sac, and then Vista Drive has a cul-de-sac. There's only one outlet for any of these roads. We can't go anywhere except out onto Irish Hill. So with 9 houses, potentially that means 18 cars. And 18 cars coming out at that intersection is a lot of traffic. We have, and I'm going to use this word, personal opinion, endured the construction at the intersection of Irish Hill and Thompson Road, which turns out to be a pretty nice development. However, the traffic has posed some problems, and the traffic coming out of that development doesn't seem to recognize the stop sign there. And there has been one accident and many close calls. I've had a close call there, my husband's had a close call there. So recognizing a stop sign isn't something that we can rely on. But more importantly for me is the number of cars that are going to be coming out of that one driveway. So I don't know, 9 seems to be a lot. Houses and lots back there at that corner with no outlet. And the second concern I have is I would want some assurance on a border protection for property liability purposes, because that's our property border that goes right down the line of those nine lots. So those are my concerns.
Okay, Dave, do you want to respond to that?
No.
Okay. Right, next person who'd like to speak.
Yes, I'm Caroline Howland. I live at 111 Vista Drive.
Okay. Do you swear swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of surgery?
I do.
I just said surgery. Perjury.
Perjury. I knew what you meant.
Sorry, doctor's on my mind. Please proceed.
Yeah. As was previously stated, I am concerned that the stop sign for the development at the end of Thompson Road is not heated. So I am concerned about that. Increasing even more traffic in the neighborhood is only going to make it less safe for like I grew up in this neighborhood and I have fond memories of just biking without really worrying about things. And so I do have concern for, future young people in this neighborhood is just kind of turning it into a less safe neighborhood and one that feels more suburban than I think anyone who is an original homeowner in this area ever hoped it to be when we first built. So that's definitely a concern. I also have concerns over, I don't know about residential building or the environmental impact statements that may or may not have to be conducted, but because of the Class 2 and Class 3 wetlands, I am concerned about the environmental impact of increasing impermeable surfaces in that area, not just during construction, but now you have roofs and driveways and that extra pavement and roads and all that runoff and how that's going to really impact this area. So that is definitely a concern. And I just feel, I know, whatever, I'm screaming into a void, but I just feel like this is just not the nature of what this neighborhood was about. And so, thank you. It's very upsetting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person I'm sorry, Dave, do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, just very quickly, as part of the town plan, which is also reflected in the zoning bylaw, is that this is identified as having a potential of much higher density. And the intent is basically to bring new residential growth closer to the village and to minimize the impacts on the further out rural areas. So in that particular case, the Griffins are trying to balance between the maximum that's allowed and something that's less. So at this point, they felt that this particular layout was one that was sensitive to the character of the land, and out of all that, have come forward with this particular plan. The new impervious areas all have to meet the 2017 state stormwater rules. So there will be a number of state permits that have to be acquired to basically support this particular project. So there will be plenty of reviews beyond just the town, and we're obligated as part of this submission process to demonstrate how we are complying with those particular state stormwater rules. So typically for preliminary plat applications, you're required to either demonstrate you don't need to get a state stormwater permit or to actually provide a copy of the application. So again, this is the town's way of basically ensuring that any project that triggers the needs is truly being followed, being carried forward, I should say, as far as that's concerned. I think that's good for now.
Any other member of the public like to make a comment or ask a question in connection with this matter? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Linda Bigelow. I own the property to the east of that.
Okay, do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration will be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Sorry about that. Please proceed.
That's okay. I guess I'm looking more for information about, or raising, it's not so much a concern as Thompson Road, it is not clear where it ends. It is paved beyond that, where Cedar Ridge Drive comes in, but it has been a right-of-way. There used to be a dump further up in that area up to the north. So that's something that, if the intersection is going to be changed, should be evaluated or clarified. The small property that's just east of the Griffin's house, I think it's a very small lot, and I'm not sure, the house is very close to Thompson Road, or the extension of Thompson Road. So that's kind of how that fits into the whole picture is another concern. The only other thing that I can think of is, other than the well water, which is a good question, just visibility as you're looking through that area. I assume that the aesthetics will be considered.
Any comments in response to that, Dave?
And I guess I would also just like to say, the whole traffic and intersection thing is probably one of the bigger concerns. And also, it sounds like possible connection to sewer is a plus for neighbors that are there. Are there any other pluses? Vermont Gas, that sort of thing. So that would be another, are there any other things that could improve the situation for existing homes there.
Thank you. Dave, any response to any of those comments?
Yeah, just very quickly. The extent of Thompson Road in the northerly direction is a question, and as part of the boundary survey of the property that's required as part of the preliminary plat application, this will be vetted and determined as far as what its status is. One thing that this small house is doing is utilizing a portion of that rights-of-way, and we thought at one point in time of actually, utilizing the rights-of-way to service these two lots over here, but as it turns out, the way this particular house is using this, we just felt that that was going to be quite an intrusion, especially based on how close the house is to the rights-of-way line itself. So that's why we offset this particular private drive in such a way to basically try to allow the uses of that existing home and how it's utilizing the existing rights-of-way to not be interrupted. So there was a little bit of thought with regard to at least trying to minimize the impacts on what's happening with the front of the house at that location. But the point is well taken that as we go forward with the perimeter boundary survey and the research associated with that, we'll understand better exactly what the limits of Thompson Road is in this particular location. This used to be the access to the old dump, and so that's somewhere up in here. There are staff members in our office that actually remember when they were children coming out to the dump. So, but exactly the location that is, I believe, in this neck of the woods, not further north. Whoops. Oh, okay. Very good. I've been corrected. So we look forward to providing more meat to the bone as far as the process moving forward.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to speak in this matter? Come on up. Can you pan the...
Hi, my name is Doralee LeBlanc. I reside at 555 Thompson Road, the cute little house that everyone keeps pointing to. That's been in my family since 1952.
Okay, so I need to ask you, will you swear or affirm that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
So help me God.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So I want to first address some concerns that people have shared about Thompson Road. And it's been recently determined after due diligence over several months that Thompson Road ends approximately 106 feet from Cedar Ridge, and written into my deed is a right-of-way. So I feel, addressing the four-way stop, that would be isolating my home to a stop and feeling like it disconnects. But so I just feel like others that a four-way stop might not be heeded to. My children are often seen playing outside, and their limit is that stop sign. Because if I could invite the Shelburne Police to sit in my driveway, I would, to catch all the people who see a stop sign as stoptional. But I don't feel that is neighborly, and instead I give my kids that limit. One thing that I heard, I see that this is 9 lots, just under the Act 250 of 10. But one thing that Revy said at the opening was that there was a maximum of 32 units, and that concerns me. I don't know if that means that some of these lots might be turned into townhomes, or if there is the plan for a 9-home maximum. But that will drastically, in my opinion, or it's my concern that it would change the feel of the neighborhood. As someone who also grew up on that street, with my understanding of there being a 5-acre minimum on Vista and Cedar Ridge, that having homes in such close proximity would change the feel of what one of our neighbors down at the beginning of Thompson Road said was a country road. I do have a concern that on my tiny little property up front there, and this is a concern that I addressed with the neighbors who are proposing this, I have wetlands that are not shown on this diagram, and the proposed driveway right behind my property to access lots 2 and 3 do not meet the 50-foot setback that the state has for wetlands. I value those, the birds value them. I can't imagine the environmental impact of having a road driveway created, less than 50 feet away from that. One thing is, the lack of pedestrian safety. We talk about people running the stop signs, but there are a lot of people from the community who also walk that road, bless you. I was chatting with a woman who walks almost every day, and she comes from Mount Philo because she enjoys the serenity that that road has to offer. Now, if there are cars going in both directions, pedestrians have to leave the road. There's not enough safe passage for them. So I'm thinking about the kids who are riding their bikes. I'm thinking about the people who walk with their dogs, and there are a lot of dog walkers. And I think that pretty much on a minimum here, we are accurately looking at 18 cars, assuming that it's a 9-house maximum. Those are 18 extra cars that we have to look out for and step aside for without there being proper pedestrian safety for the pedestrians who are using this road already. I have a spring located on Lida's and her husband's property that's also in my deed. In the close proximity to it, that's something that I need to look into, but it does make me question what kind of impact that's going to have for what is supposed to be potable water accessible for my family. One thing that I considered because of the amount of homes is looking at the neighborhood, bless you, on the left, and that there's a street light and how it's kind of serene and peaceful that nowhere throughout the Thompson, Cedar Ridge, there are street lights. So I'm not sure how adding a neighborhood, if that would require additional lights or just it's something that came to mind that could possibly change the aesthetics of the road as well. I mentioned the pedestrian safety. There is a preschool that runs year-round on this road, and there is a home that has several summer camps. So this is not just the safety of people who reside or people who like to stroll from Mount Philo Road, but this is for people who are coming and servicing homes currently there. And yeah, okay, I think I've taken up time.
Thank you. You could just hand the mic to Dave, that would be appreciated. Before I invite any response that Dave has, Ravi, do you want to comment on the 32 maximum units?
Sure. So that is based on the math that you have 20,000 square feet per single family dwelling. And that is over, let's see, existing would be, it's quite a large number. It's 20,000 square feet over 618,805 square feet. And that is including the wetlands, class 2, just the class 2 wetlands. So that ends up being around 32 if staff estimates that with the wetlands taken into consideration, it lowers to about 28 to 30 maximum.
So just to clarify what that is, under the applicable town land use regs, it would be permissible to put 28 units on this property.
Yes.
Does that change whether or not this development with 9 proceeds?
That's a question for the applicant, whether how much they would like to develop and their scope of their development for the future. But in terms of in my role as staff, that's the maximum, and the applicant chooses to be well below that threshold.
But if this particular proposal doesn't proceed at all, they would still, by your estimate, the property owner would still have the right to put up to high 20s of units there.
If they choose, and if they choose to come back to the development review board in this hypothetical situation, then yes.
Dave, did you want to make any responses to the issues that were raised by the last speaker?
Just real quickly, as far as the wetlands,
What we are required to do is have a professional wetland ecologist come out on site, walk the entire area, identify all wetlands, and there are 2 types technically 3 types, Class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 being the highest value in the state of Vermont. There's only a handful that have been identified so far. Class 2 wetlands basically have certain functions and values and of size that the state feels are very important and takes jurisdiction over, and with that comes a 50-foot buffer where they regulate all activities within 50 feet. So if you propose anything within 50 feet of that Class 2 wetland, you're required to get a permit from them. And then there's Class 3 wetlands, which the state of Vermont doesn't take jurisdiction over, but the United States Army Corps of Engineers still has jurisdiction on any type of wetland. So there's still that particular regulatory authority that's required to be dealt with as part of any impact to wetlands. So it's not a simple process. Other things that we do ask the neighbors permission for to do is to go on their property and to map their wetlands, because if it is a Class 2 wetland on their property and the 50-foot buffer, if it was Class 2, extends on to the Griffin's property, for example, we would need to heed that. But we can only heed that if we know where the wetland limits are. So that's what a cooperative component that we look for with the neighbors. They don't have to let us on the property, but nonetheless, we're looking to basically try to provide the strongest representation of existing conditions as possible.
Any additional board member questions? Any additional questions or comments from the public at this stage? Sure. You've already been sworn in, so you don't have to go through that again.
Okay, great. I do want to mention there is a Class 1 wetlands that is fairly close by. There are trails that kind of run from our neighborhood through them to town, to the village. And I just was doing volunteer work in there recently and being mindful of construction near there. So I am concerned about how impacting like one location of the wetland might trickle into other parts of the ecosystem, because they may be aesthetically pleasing for humans, but they are really important for our ecology in general. So it's just a little troublesome that we're thinking about building in this area. And then I also just want to be very mindful, like, great, there could be 32 units, like 9 therefore doesn't sound that bad, but like, let's please be wary of that, like, argument that it could always be worse, because I just feel strongly that 9 units is already an overwhelming number for this location.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, that we have 2 people who are interested in speaking.
I just want to reiterate.
Well, let's get you in the mic.
Oh, sorry. I can be loud. Y'all can probably hear me talking to my kids.
You've already been sworn in.
I've been sworn in. She's talking about 9, and it literally is doubling the amount of traffic. On Vista Drive and Cedar Ridge, there are 9 homes. So when we think of 9, I'm counting all of them. And I'm squishing them all down and putting them on the little spot. So it's doubling the traffic.
Okay. Any other member of the public? Yes, ma'am.
Lita Finch again.
Thank you.
One of the conundrums, I think, that Shelburne faces, particularly since we're so close to the town, is without sidewalks, we drive. And when the development went in at the end of Thompson, at the intersection of Irish Hill, 66 houses, I don't know what it ended up being, and all those cars, but no sidewalk. We have a lot of people who walk from our neighborhood on Thompson Road into the village. We have a lot of, as was said, a lot of dog walkers, a lot of kids, a lot of bicycles, and no sidewalk. And what we're doing is we're increasing traffic so that we continue to have to drive into the village because it's not safe to walk, and yet so many people would like to walk. And so here we are trying to reduce emissions, but at the same time eliminate pedestrians, particularly pedestrian safety. So I want that to be taken into consideration as well.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, go ahead.
Just one other really question. I believe, and I think Bill Griffin mentioned this to me, that the zoning got changed at the time of that development on Thompson and Irish Hill. I know when we bought the property, if I remember correctly, the zoning was 5 acre. and subsequently it was changed to much smaller lot requirement. And I'm curious as to when and how that occurred, because I had, until this development proposal came out, I did not realize the zoning had changed.
So Cedar Ridge, which is located eastward of this proposed development, was a planning and development platted out in the early 80s. So at that time, it was I think 5 acre minimum, but because it's a planning and development, you can have smaller lots as long as you set aside open space. With these rules currently in effect, my knowledge is that it goes back at least 10 years based on the records. It may go back further than that, but at least 10 years for the residential district.
I think, if I recall, some of those zoning changes occurred at the same time of the master planning for the wastewater treatment plant improvements. I think we're at 15 years now on that particular one, only because our office actually prepared the service area for the municipal sewer wastewater treatment facilities, and they seem to mimic exactly what the zoning was. That enabled the larger density. So again, wherever there was sewer, there was larger density allowed to basically allow the densities to occur closer to the village rather than in the remote areas. So I think it's probably been a good 15 years now.
Thank you. Ma'am?
I've been sworn in.
Yes.
So
It'd be
this,
helpful if you mention your name again.
it's Linda Bigelow. And
Thank
the other thing that this conversation brings to mind is whether this development would have any impact on the intersection of Irish Hill and Thompson Road. Because when the development was done at that intersection, there was a lot of public sentiment about widening that intersection area. So they did install a right-hand turn lane as you're coming towards towards town down Irish Hill, so you can get over there because it's a sharper turn than a or it's a very sharp turn. At the time, they chose not to allow a lane to turn into Thompson Road coming from Shelburne, a left-hand turn lane. They did widen the shoulder and level it a little bit. I've had a number of times waiting there to turn left when people come screaming by on the right on the shoulder. So that would be a concern, given the increased traffic, is whether that intersection will also be considered to be improved, because there will be more people coming and turning left in there.
Any other, Dave, do you want a response? Any other questions or comments in connection with this matter? Board, public, anybody? Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay.
Hi.
Can you identify yourself, please?
My name's Andrea Bemke. I live on Vista Drive.
Okay. Do you swear that the evidence you're going to give in the cause under consideration will be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Proceed.
I guess just in reference to safety from our neighborhood, back when that original development came about off of Thompson, we were really concerned about access to the village, about the amount of pedestrians and people riding bikes, and really kind of the lack of safety from Thompson Road over, like across the Platte Bridge. It's a blind corner. Cars are going very quickly down Irish Hill, and now we're going to increase even more houses in that area. More people trying to get to the village might want to bike, might want to walk, and if there's any considerations for that at all in terms of, I know it's a difficult thing with the bridge and everything like that, or is that something that's being considered in all of this, the amount of traffic going into the town from this area? Because it's really is, and there's a lot of bikers coming down there. There's just a lot going around there, and we're going to increase now more people who want to access the village in a way other than driving.
Just to finish up on the pedestrian thing, end of things, I understand that there had been a study done to basically connect the end of the existing concrete sidewalk on Falls Road as it approaches in the easterly direction across the bridge and then up the hill. And I think the topographical limitations or the existing features of the homes and the trees in the area created a lot of challenges. If it was easy, I would have thought it would have been done by now. But that's just me sitting on the side. But there were efforts by the town to try to figure out how to basically provide at least that pedestrian connectivity from the Rivercrest project down into the village. It may be time to dust that off. So those are all good things. Those are all good questions as far as, again, how to, recognize that the existing conditions today are not ideal, and that what we need to be doing is figuring out how to basically improve upon that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I will entertain a motion if a board member would. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Wait till you have the mic.
Dora Lee LeBlanc again. We were just chatting that it might be important to mention that there is already a building lot for sale. We're talking about increased traffic on this road. There is a building lot for sale on the right. It's a larger property that has been on for sale for a while. And then it's our understanding that there are 3 lots for sale at the beginning of Thompson Road. So we are already looking at adding homes to this road and just taking all of the additional foot traffic, road traffic into mind. I know that that's not necessarily directly connected to this, but it's just a lot of growth.
All right, thank you. Any more comments? Okay. We are at the sketch plan stage, the purpose of which is to provide feedback to the applicant. And at this point, the board really just decides to let the matter proceed to a next stage where a decision will be made as to whether to modify it, reject it, or approve it. This is just an input device stage for people that haven't participated in the sketch plan stage before. Is there a board member who wishes to make a motion?
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
When I look at this, I thought that we were moving to classify this as a major subdivision. So
Robbie?
that is the motion, right?
Yes, that
Okay.
has to be done prior to
Okay.
any other motions.
And there's no dispute about the subdivision classification, right?
Okay.
Okay. Right, so that needs to be built into any motion.
Okay.
Do I have a board member willing to make a motion?
I can attempt to. Motion to classify application SUB 1911 as a major subdivision, and also authorize staff to move, direct staff to move a prepare decision to authorize Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of William and Christine Griffin to prepare a preliminary plan review application for SUB 1911. Recommendations include a landscaping plan depicting hardwood shade trees on both sides of the proposed roadway. And that's it. Did I miss anything, Robbie?
No. We also need to make a motion to finalize the record and to close the hearing as well.
I did not.
Okay. You need to
So
do
I
that.
will make
Just
a
the
motion
formality.
to finalize it
Yeah,
and close the hearing.
We're treating that all as one motion with different parts, just to be
Sorry.
clear. Okay, so Ann made the motion. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So I need to take a quick break. Yeah. Now, we're going to take about a 2-3 minute break for anybody that needs to use the facilities. We're going to resume the proceeding now. So the next item, and actually the last listed item on the agenda, is application SUB 13-02R3, which has been continued. Application by Shelburne Green LLC for final plan review to modify previous conditions of approval, property at 120 Graham Way. And I will let Ravi walk us through the latest status report.
So this item was previously heard on July 17th. A number of items that were, that the DRB still needs to discuss include the modifications, whether the modifications of the permit conditions would change the nature of the proposed accessory food service use, placement of the accessory food service use and the permit conditions of preliminary plan review, and also concerts and events in the PUD. Attorney Murphy provided me a correction to the overview that he can distribute to the DRB at this moment. And let it be known that this item that Attorney Murphy is providing is Exhibit A for the record. This is a correction to their request that they would like clarification. Staff understands that regarding condition number 1 to be amended, that the applicant would like a building up to 40,000 square feet to be built, which is a conjoint building of 1, 5, and 6. With the condition, with the number 2 item amendment to condition 7, the applicant has now stated that they would like to end the operations of the accessory food service use at 9 p.m. To clarify, this is my understanding as staff was that in the sketch plan and preliminary plan, the applicant requested a modification of the hours from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Right now, is the applicant requesting a modification from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. or anything differing from that?
Yes, the doors would close at 9 p.m.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'm,
Somebody still comes in at 8:45, they'd be served, but the doors would close at 9.
so
I apologize.
I'm looking at your August 9th letter. The third real paragraph, nominally the fourth paragraph, says the application seeks to change food service cafe from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sorry, this is not from you. This is from Nancy Henstead. So-
Chair, prior to receiving any testimony from Attorney Murphy, please do swear all parties that will be contributing to this hearing.
Yeah. I think that's the most efficient way of handling swearing.
Anyway, you can do a mass swearing. To finish this off, staff would like to note that for items that have not been explicitly requested by the applicant, that they really shouldn't touch it because it's not within the scope of the hearing. It's something that should be done in another hearing that if the applicant would like concert events, if the applicant would like a change in the location, that staff can facilitate that hearing to allow for these amendments to occur, but those things are outside the scope of the hearing, and that the scope of the hearing is the combination of, is this request to combine buildings 1, 5, and 6 into a 40,000 square foot building, and also a change in condition number 7 to change the hours of operation from now 10 a.m. to 9 p.m.
So there's basically 2 items.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to invite you to comment on that, but just to get the who's under oath out of the way, will anyone who plans to make any comment whatsoever on any aspect of this, please stand all at once, and we're going to have a mass swearing, just to save ourselves time instead of doing it one by one. So anyone who even thinks they're going to say something. Do you hereby swear or affirm that the evidence you'll give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I did.
Thank you all. So we're not doing that again. Yeah, I guess the short version of my question for you is, are you and town staff in agreement or disagreement with his characterization of the 2 issues before the board?
Yes, good evening. For the record, my name is Liam Murphy, here representing the applicant. Also here this evening is Graham Goldsmith, who is the owner and developer, and then Dave Marshall is also representing the applicant, and somewhere Norm is hiding out. Yeah, after the last hearing, we did submit a letter as of July 31st. That's in your package, and it does clarify. There are really the 2 issues. One, combining the buildings and the size, and the corrections that we just handed out are just technical. They match what you have approved in the preliminary plan. So we're not changing anything. We were just correcting the amount. It still doesn't exceed 40,000. It's a little less, but that's that. And there's really been no issue since preliminary plan about that portion of the application.
the entire discussion, most of the discussion last time and since has focused around the extension of the approved food service hours from originally we had proposed 6 to 10, now we're proposing service ending at 9. And that is what all is really before the board. I mean, the preliminary plat dealt with all those other issues, and really that's the only issue I think left.
Goal in this dialogue. I'm trying to see if we can agree on what, in effect, what we are not discussing tonight.
Right.
So we're discussing the combination of the buildings, and we're discussing the change in hours. We are not discussing the location of the food service. We are not discussing concerts or special events, because none of those are before the board. The only two matters, and I'm saying this pejoratively, but I'm asking both you and town staff to agree, if it's accurate, that
Mr. Chairman, is the public not a party to this discussion?
you are absolutely a party to the discussion, but not as to the issue of the scope of the matter before the board. So.
I prepared a statement about that, but if I'm not.
We will hear anything anyone wants to say, but if the applicant and the town staff agree on the scope, my inclination would be that the board would honor that agreement. I'm simply trying to confirm whether I correctly understand there's an agreement on that or not. I don't mean a written agreement. I mean, they both seem to have said pretty much the exact same thing using slightly different words. And I'm just trying to clarify that as a preliminary matter, before we go further into the proceedings. So, Ravi, any comment?
I agree with that, Chair, staff. One thing to note is that anything that is extraneous must be treated as extraneous, and therefore must be clarified in any finding, that in a conclusion that anything that is extraneous to the scope of this hearing is not approved, and any changes to that would require further amendment. That's the only thing that staff asks, is that if the applicant would like to have concert uses, then please, as the GRV, be sure to put that in the conclusion, saying that this may be possible if and only if an amendment to the conditions of allowed uses is explicitly sought at a later date. But that's the only thing.
To be honest with you, my inclination, and I'm speaking for myself, not for the board, would be to have any board decision limited strictly to the matters before the board and not discussing any matter that's not decided, because we aren't going to develop a full record to render a decision on it, and technically it's not before us to decide in the first place. So are the two of you?
I agree absolutely with that position, because by deciding any condition, whether it's included or not, you're making a decision. So we think the best thing is the decision should be on the hours, and the decision should be on the building, and that's it.
May I comment? I'd like to.
No, I didn't.
I would just like to make sure that, so reading your report, Bobby, here, and as I recall, the DRB in its previous decision felt that the food service could be an incidental use of the facility. Could. But we required further information. And I would like to also discuss that here at this hearing.
So now there are three things we're discussing?
We need
I
to
think
get
that's
our,
very-
we need to get our count straight. I understand
Yeah.
the history,
No,
and I
I-
agree with your characterization of it. But that's different from what the two of you just said.
Correct.
What the two of you just said was that the issues are the combination of the building and the change in hours in the food service. Is there also, between those two, is the food service appropriate in the first place?
Staff understands that a change in the hours of operation may lead to this accessory food service use that has been approved into a primary use. And so, because a determination needs to be made that if the hours of operation were to be extended, could an accessory food service use be operable in that location, in the PUD. And the DRB concluded that, yes, it could be, it may be, but at the present moment, as proposed, the DRB did not have enough information at the time. That was my understanding. But within this notion is that if there are modifications to the hours of operation, is it still an accessory food service use?
Well, are you saying that whether it is an accessory food service use is before the board tonight?
Whether it is an accessory food service use with the proposed hours of operation.
So the issue, as you pose it, is is how the hours of use change whether it's an incidental use.
Exactly, yes.
You're not raising any other issue with respect to whether it's incidental? Because I don't see that in the record. I see the issue of the hours changing, whether it's an incidental use, but I haven't seen any other issue raised as whether there's a change.
Well, if I could add to that, again, as I have read through this, and I apologize, I know that one of the things when we deliberated before on the previous approval was that, again, we said that it could be an ancillary use. However, we needed more information like the menu. And my apologies, I did not know that you had previously submitted a menu, and it was in my latest packet. So that actually helps provide me with some information that can actually help me decide whether this is actually a incidental use or not. And so I think that since we had requested that in the previous approval process, we should also include that discussion because the whole issue of hours, yay or nay, actually depends on, well, is this an incidental use or not? And they kind of like.
Well, if it isn't an incidental use, why do the hours make a difference?
They wouldn't. So I think we have to talk about that first.
So there are three matters before us?
If I might just add a couple things. In the 2014 approval, an accessory food use, a food use as an accessory use was included. In 2014, which is the permit that is current, that today a food service accessory use from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. is fully permitted. There is no question.
Yep.
In your preliminary plat approval, the condition 4 says the location of the food service use is limited to building 6, specifically as shown on the plans. So not only in the original plan, but the food service, the uses food service is approved. That is, I don't think the board cannot now say this is accessory or is not accessory. The only way you could make that argument, and we totally disagree with staff on this, is to say that somehow by having food service at 6:30 versus 5:30, the use changes. We are not asking, and the issue of an accessory food use is not a request of this application.
May I make a comment to that, please?
That's up to the chair.
Dissertation, because when it comes to incidental or accessory use, sometimes it can be difficult to really put your finger on it because it's not a nice hard rule that you can look up in some kind of a book. So you have to be a little bit. It's almost like that saying, I can't give you a definition of pornography, but I know when I see it. So I kind of have to go through that step when I was thinking about this. And your comment about the 2014 accessory use, that assumes that this is accessory use. Let me talk about how I'm looking at this now. And I'll just give some examples. So I'm thinking about, if I were to go into the hospital where I work, there are 4 establishments in there, 4 places where you can get served food. And so are those incidental or are they restaurants? So I'm thinking about, okay, they got a great menu, great food. and they'd probably rival maybe other restaurants within the city of Burlington, okay? Well, let's see, gonna celebrate my 40th wedding anniversary in a couple of weeks. So if I said to my wife, dear, what do you say we go have a nice anniversary dinner at the hospital? I don't think I'd be celebrating my 41st anniversary. It's not a restaurant, it's truly incidental or accessory to the healthcare that's going on there. So, okay, not a restaurant. So how that might this apply to that? So then I got thinking, all right, let's maybe try something more close to this. Lawson's Finest Liquids, great craft brewery. I love their beer just like Phil had. So I get onto their website, and they've built a new food service there. They call it the Tap Room, same kind of idea, which is what I felt was probably being proposed here. But if I look at what they do, okay, what do they serve? Their menu, and thank you for providing that stuff, because now I see what you're thinking about serving, and that's very helpful. Their menu is, you know, cheese, crackers, munchies, munchies, munchies. So would I go there for a meal? Would I say, hey, I'm gonna go get a meal at Lawson's? No, I wouldn't, because they really don't serve meals. They're serving things that are incidental as part of their tap room, where you can go taste their beers and buy their beers and whatever. So, all right, that's not a restaurant. But if I look at your menu, and by the way, they close at 8 p.m., doors locked at 8 p.m. So if I look at your menu and your hours, proposed hours, I look at the food you serve there and the hours, I could say to my buddy on Wednesday night, hey, I feel like having a burger. You want to go to Bark Eaters or you want to go to Fiddlehead? Well, I could go to Fiddlehead because I want to have a meal, and it becomes a destination for me. And so when I think of that, it's like, you know what? If that's a destination, and I really don't care that I'm going to go taste beer, boy, that feels like a restaurant to me. Can you tell me where I'm going wrong with that kind of logic?
Two issues. One, that the food service that is already approved, and therefore
Ancillary food service.
But you could this food, if a food service was established, it could have that identical. When that food service is that is now approved at 5:30 at night, you could go get a burger there without a permit, because the permit's been approved as accessory use. That is the issue, and the bigger issue here, the real problem that I see is, and you know, this is what I do is land use law. I interpretation and litigation and applications, and the question is, if you as a board decide this operation is only going to serve this type of food that's in this menu, is every time that the daily special has to come back to you and say, sorry, that wasn't an approved menu item? The issue is the food this incidental to this entire planned unit development of hundreds of thousands, ultimately 100,000 plus square feet of offices, retail, warehouse, distribution, and the Fiddlehead Brewery. It is not just serving that; it is serving the entire PUD as well. And the difference, I think, is people. It is incidental to the entire PUD. It is so.
Let me make a comment that nobody will like, but my view on this is a procedural one. If the applicant is simply asking us to review and approve hours, then if town staff is right, that has other implications, then that's the applicant's problem. They have a permit to operate within hours that may not cover the nature of their operation. My concern is if we're going to make a substantive decision on whether it's an incidental use, and it sounds like in your view that wouldn't be based just on hours. It would be based on menus and several other things, even though the only change they are asking for is hours. So that, I'm wondering whether we're getting involved in a discussion that neither the applicant nor town staff has raised. As I understood town staff's comment earlier, the issue that they had with whether the food service was incidental use was whether a change in that status would be triggered by amending the hours.
Ravi, could I ask you a question? In the approved permit 2014, is the food service deemed to be no more than an incidental service? Could the applicant, if they stayed within those hours, actually have a full-service restaurant open to the public?
No. The permit condition specifically states that an accessory food service use that is incidental and subordinate to the entire PUD can be approved, is approved. And specific to that is that defining, in order to help define this accessory food service use, was condition number 7, stating that the hours of this accessory food service use is limited to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. to provide some shape onto what exactly is incidental and subordinate hours during daytime.
But was there any discussion of menu, variety of food, anything? Was there a discussion other than hours and location that you recall? I've looked at it, and I don't see any reference to anything other than hours and location.
In 2014, no.
So they got an approval which addresses the issue you're interested in, but only in the context of hours and location.
Right, but I think you still have to get back at what's the definition of accessory and incidental. And I got did a little extract here, so if you're into land use law, whatever, a couple of, very prevalent codes adopted by the state of Vermont, NFPA 101 and the International Business Code, and they define incidental or accessory as minor uses that are subordinate to the support of the predominant occupancy.
Well,
So
you're joining the substance of the issue. What I'm asking is procedurally, is that issue in front of us?
I think it's
I'm not expressing a view on whether your argument is correct or wrong.
Yeah, I hear you.
I'm asking whether it's before us.
Right. Because we could keep, we have scope creep in this conversation. We keep going around the subjects. There's 2 items before us.
I guess my,
And so the question would be, I guess procedurally, if there are other questions, how do those get resolved? Because they're not going to get resolved just because we start talking about them.
And one answer is that each party, both the town and the applicant, take the risks if they, by assuming they don't need to be further resolved. My point, though, is procedurally, and when I look at the request to changes in this most recent application, we're not asked to rule on anything other than the combination of the building and the change in hours. Those are the only requests before us. And I'm nervous how we justify ruling on other issues. That doesn't mean that there aren't very good reasons to rule against the applicant on other issues, but I'm not seeing them being before us. I'm gonna let everybody in the room have their word in on this. I just wanted to get these 2 and the board members' views out, and then I'll absolutely encourage yours.
is anybody able to make a comment at this point?
Well, yes, I'm just trying to confirm there are no additional board comments, and then anybody can raise their hand and make a comment.
I don't know if I can really grasp the procedural thing, but where I'm having difficulty is if I'm being asked to look at the hours, there's also another piece to the equation, and that's the use, and is it in conformance? And I don't know how we can address the hours without understanding
And
it.
I think what the chair is saying is, if the applicant chooses and opens what you would define as a restaurant and not an accessory use, they are obviously subjecting themselves to an enforcement action by the town to say, hey, that's not an accessory to your project, or to your planned unit development. That's the risk. We believe that it is. The staff believes that it may not be. And so, but that's not before you. I mean, that's the issue.
It seems to me that if it isn't in the application, it's not before us. We rule in the application.
And we have to say, we're really quite, Graham has come tonight and would like to have a short discussion with you, because what we're really concerned about here is this is almost 2 years for this application. And if we don't get a decision, whether, right now, the tail is wagging the dog. The tail here is these hours of this food service use. The dog is trying to build a new series of buildings that will accommodate a business that has, has basically said, if this doesn't get resolved, they're leaving town. So,
That issue is clearly not before the board, and you're allowing the applicant to. Use the microphone, please.
Yeah, just a second. I take your point of order. I didn't take that as placing an issue before the board. I took that as discussing a consequence. Everybody else will have a possible consequence. Everybody else will have the opportunity to point out what they believe are the consequences, such as noise impacting nearby houses. It's another example of a consequence on the different side of this particular discussion. But I.
You're going to close the door on what you're going to talk about, and therefore preempt people who come here to try to convince you otherwise from what this conversation is going on.
Well, what I'm trying to get consensus on, if I can, is what we are supposed to decide. And it seems to me that the mechanical answer to what we're supposed to decide is defined by what's in the application.
And everything that's been submitted voluntarily by the applicant since. It's all part of the application. And when staff lists the 77 things that are part of the application for you to review to make a decision.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we should have done this earlier. Yeah, why don't you give them the.
Well, where are we in the process?
If I could kind of give an overview, I think a lot of your questions and concerns could get answered. Is that appropriate?
Clark actually has he doesn't literally have the mic, but he has the floor at this point. And you can finish your thought.
Thank you. In terms of the scope of this hearing, Mr. Chairman, when you, as a board, chose to continue the hearing, and when the applicant chose to allow the hearing to continue as opposed to be closed, there was a very specific piece of homework that was given. And the homework was given and done. The staff was asked as to whether the 2014 permit permitted the accessory food service to be where they show it on the map.
I recall that, which is why, based on my understanding that the two parties had agreed that they weren't pursuing that, I started the meeting with asking them whether I had a correct understanding that they agreed that the location of the food service wasn't before that. The reason I was willing to entertain that agreement is that as I read the actual application, it isn't mentioned.
But the maps that are submitted over time and added to the exhibits are part of the application. Everything the applicant has submitted in support of the application is part of the legal application. I think
Certainly part of the legal document. The question is whether it's what we decide.
Well, that's completely different. I mean, if I were sitting on the other side of the table, I'd be saying it would be more efficient just to let everybody say what they want to say, and the board can determine what's relevant or not. You have the power when you make a decision to say this line of testimony was not on point and we're not considering it. But what's happening right now is I'm feeling like the two parties are having a discussion about what can and can't be talked about, while members of the audience may have different opinions, and some of the and reasons that those opinions are based on that neither staff or the applicant is presenting.
Which is why you have the mic, and anyone who wishes to speak will have the mic. And it will all be part of the record. I was trying to clarify as a procedural matter, at the end of everything that's heard, what are we deciding? And my instinct is that that this board and any court are decide what is set out in the claim, in the request. And the request has two items in it: combining the buildings and changing the hours. They all have tangential issues that are complex, and several people in the room have done a wonderful job of explaining the implications for them, and I respect and appreciate that.
But you're running the risk of issuing a permit that has two different locations for food service in it, because your staff has told you that where the applicant is showing it on the current map is not in the location that it's approved.
Well, if we issued the permit, as town staff encouraged us to toward the beginning of this session, we would make clear what we were not deciding, and that would be what the location is, among others.
Well, what's the status of the map that shows it there that's been turned in as evidence to the board?
It's evidence before the board, but if the parties, both parties, wish to, meaning town staff and the applicant, wish us to limit the decision to only the application, I don't see what basis I could use to explain to a judge later on that I had the authority to decide something that neither the applicant nor the town asked me to decide.
They asked you by putting a map on the board showing the location of the food service. They put that into evidence, and if you approve this, they are going to say that you've approved it in both places.
They can say anything they want. If we say in our decision that we're not deciding that issue one way or the other, then if they disagree with that, they'll have to take us to court.
Well, I think there's a number of issues like this. I think that when the applicant comes in and submits an agreement with the Gables Board that talks about concerts, and when Norm comes in and responds to your question, are you planning to have concerts? And he says, yes, we're planning to have 4 a year. These are the applicant's representatives voluntarily testifying and putting material into the record. And I would completely understand and appreciate if in your decision you listed the things that you weren't making a decision about. But the fact of the matter is they've been put into the record, and if you're silent about them, you do so at the town's risk.
I agree, which is why we won't be silent about them.
Okay, thank you. I reserve the right to speak
Absolutely.
on further matters
Absolutely.
later, but
Absolutely.
on this procedural issue, I'm certainly saying that I believe that all the issues that were brought up by the applicant, by maps, testimony, or written documents submitted voluntarily by the applicant, that those are all materials that the public is entitled to comment on because the applicant has placed them into evidence.
I understand your point, and I emphatically agree with your position that the board in any decision should clarify specifically what it is and is not deciding. You're absolutely right. So, next.
Okay, well,
And just for the record, name.
okay. My name is Graham Goldsmith. I'm the architect and developer of the project, and appreciate the opportunity to be speaking tonight. 2 years ago, I came to the board, and I don't think many of you were on the board at that time. I think the board has changed, so I thought it might be worthwhile to kind of talk about the project somewhat in my perspective of what I was trying to do here. We came by with the idea that the same question back then: can we make one of the buildings bigger, and can we change the hours of the accessory food service from 6 to 9? And that is where we started. So just so everybody understands, we started with a building. This was a dilapidated building. It was Bearcrafters. It was owned by former Governor Snelling. It was a successful business for a while, but it turned out that over time the business went away and the buildings were becoming dilapidated and there were some environmental issues. We took a chance. We came in there. We cleaned up the environmental issues there, refaced the whole outside of the building. We followed green building leads certification standards and specifications to try to do what we thought would be a very nice project. The idea was to create a office park that met green building standards, that provided an attractive place to have offices and manufacturing, that promoted, that offered jobs for people, that increased the ability to raise taxes, and just became an attractive place to work. During our opening, when Eating Well magazine opened, we had the governor came at that time and spoke about the project and talked about, I'll quote, this is a model for future development in Shelburne and Vermont by providing clean industry that utilizes green building standards, supported the farming industry, contributed to the tax base both locally and throughout the state. Recently, there was a development conference put on by White and Burke, in which the project was praised as being a very successful mixed-use project. So we initially, as we've already talked about, got an approval in 2014 in which as we moved down the project, by the way, we then started phase 2, which became individual buildings. Each one was going to be a different food producer. So far we have Douglas Sweets, we have Vermont Tortilla, we have Fiddlehead, and we have the Vermont Distillery. And our idea was to continue with that. And in this approval, each space could have up to 20% of their space be available for retail up to 1,500 square feet. And in addition to that, there was a 2,500 square foot accessory food service approved at that time. Now, let's keep in mind for a minute what we're talking about here. This is 2,500 square feet. This includes bathrooms and kitchens. It's not a great big place. This is a place where you would walk up to a counter, order some food, sit down, come back up, grab your food, sit down again, eat, and then bring your stuff back out. It's almost really like a cafeteria. It's not intended to be a full-service restaurant. It never was. It seemed like a good idea to try to get people to have a place to eat there, employees that are part of the project. And we tried for 7 years to get anybody. Nobody wanted to come in and run a food service that closed at 6 o'clock. There was just nobody would do that. So as part of this, that's why we're asking that the food service timing be changed to a point that makes it reasonable for somebody to run that business. You know, as we went along, we've come in here and the property taxes started at $60,000. They're now up $190,000. We've created 140 jobs and construction jobs as well. And in this process, we've made an extensive effort to be respectful to our neighbors. I know there were some concerns. We put, as you probably all know, and maybe you haven't seen the whole plan, but we provided a 150-foot buffer. We are leaving all the existing mature maple trees back there. We're adding hundreds of trees to add to the additional buffering. We got a 6-foot fence along the property line between the Gables property and the project. We've agreed that the back of these buildings will be painted dark green to blend in with the vegetation. We've agreed that there will be no outside access to those buildings other than an emergency door if necessary to get out of a building. So there'll be no deliveries back there, nothing like that. And further to that, we had a meeting with Clark Hinsdale last week, and we talked about this in more detail, and we agreed to add another fence. And this fence would go behind the buildings and make sure that nobody can walk back into this 150-foot buffer zone. And keep in mind that the buildings, the food service, whether or not it happens or not, it's almost 600 feet away from the nearest neighbor. The noise level that comes out of that, we had a study done. We presented that 2 years ago, in which the decibel levels at the property line were well within the acceptable standards for the town. So we do care about our neighbors. We've worked out an agreement with them. We have a signed agreement that discussed all these things that we're trying to do to mitigate any issue with our neighbors. I want to, you know, whether or not you do this you approve this food service thing, the idea that it was going to be part of the Fiddlehead microbrewery, I want people to understand, if anybody's been to Traps or they've been to Harpoon, these are respectable people that run these, as is Fiddlehead. It's not a drunken beer hall. It's an attractive place. Often families go there. It's a fun place to be. And in the last 5 years, we checked with the police departments in Windsor and Stowe. There's never been a single incident of the police being called for noise or disturbance. So I just want to make that clear. So we do care about our neighbors. We do care about providing this buffer. I think we've gone above and beyond. We have an agreement with the Gables on it, and we want to make you guys all happy, and that's why I met with you, Clark, to go and add these additional features that I think will be helpful to the project. So, you know, the whole thing, I think we followed the master plan well for what the town is expecting. As these buildings are developed, you know, I always use this description, if you drive by and you squint your eyes, they look like a series of farm buildings. But if you look closely, they're metal buildings, and some of them are asymmetrical shapes, so it has an abstract and sort of informal look. And it makes for, and we left this open rolling meadow from Route 7 up, basically a wildflower meadow. And it's a great transition from the town all the way down to the farm belts that are further south of that. So we're at a point now where we really are kind of up against the wall. We have a tenant who's, I think is, well, he's pretty much had it here. He's already rented 6,000 square feet in Williston. He's ready to move out. All he's asking, the most critical thing is we need to be able to expand his business. And I can't understand why we've had so much pushback from the planning staff and frankly from the neighbors, where we've tried to do everything we can to mitigate what we're doing there. And, you know, if you think and look at the uses that could be down there, I think we've got a project that is going to give good balance, and it's going to be a fun place to go. It already is a fun place. People go there, they buy cookies at Douglas Sweets, and maybe they get tortillas, and we've got Reading Well magazine. This is meant to be, I think, what the town had in mind in the plan, in the overall master plan. So when it comes to this food service thing, we're 90% concerned about adding on to this building, and we need to be able to do this right away. I mean, we can't wait we've been 2 years, we can't wait, you know, for a 45-day deliberation, and then a 30-day appeal, and then a building permit. We're going to lose this tenant, and I think it's going to be very sad if that happens. I need to be able to get in a permit and to be able to go to the bank and get the monies that I need to then put the deposits down on the structure. So we want to do the food service. I thought it would be a great idea. Right now, you go into Shelburne Green, and if you want to get something for lunch, there's no place to go. It was never intended to be some great big overblown restaurant, which is, I think, what the impression has been. It's a place to go and get something to eat. And as I said, it didn't work closing it at 6 o'clock. Nobody wanted to go in there. So that's all I'm asking, is that we change that hour and that we get the chance to make this building bigger, and then we move on, because this construction site's been sitting open for 2 years. I would think everybody would like to see this thing move along and get the screening in and get the trees planted that we've agreed to do. And so we're not asking about having events. We agreed with the Gables that there would be a limit of 4 events, but we're not specifically asking the town right now to talk about events. We're not really asking about that. All we're asking is the hours of operation, and we're asking that we get to expand the building footprint. And I think it's too bad. Matt is not here tonight. He's pretty upset about all this. And here's a guy that's, I think, done a clean, good business there. He donates to the museum concert series every year. And he's getting the message that you don't want him. And I'm getting the feeling like you don't want me either. So if that's the case, we'll discontinue the project, but it seems like we're following what's been asked. There was a business group that got together recently that also talked about what we ought to do in Shelburne to promote business and opportunities here. And they were very complimentary about our project. And most people I've talked to said, Graham, I think the place looks great. It looks like a place I'd like to go. And we don't want to have any wars. We just want to move on and get going on this thing. And as far as the location of the buildings, if we want to get hung up on that, we can. But the original permit said that the food service would not be in buildings 7, 8, and 12. We're not in 7 or 8 and 12. We're in building 6. And the project is positioned in the location as described where it is appropriate to be. And I'll just leave it there. The board has seen it before. We were already into our second session on this. They already knew where the food service was going to be. So I don't want to make the Gables uncomfortable or anybody, but I don't know what else we can do. I'm willing to put that extra fence in, Clark. We're going to do that. I told you we'd do that, and that's what we're doing. So thank you.
Wait till you get a Great, thank you. Identify yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Ian Rutherford. I live at 132 Covington, and I'm probably one of the newest owners of a property on the Gables. I'm directly the building the unit that is closest to your development. Let me give you a couple of comments here. As I said, I'm brand new. I got wind of this after I had bought this piece of property. It did not come up before we closed on it. And I heard from various neighbors that things are going on. There's going to be, they're going to build a beer hall, or they're going to build some kind of a food operation out here. So I thought I'd better find out what's going on. You quote several of the, Mr. Goldsmith has quoted several of the other breweries, and I've been to a number of them, and you're right. They have a place where you can go and you can drink beer, and depending on where you are, you can dance. You can have outside concerts. But what concerned me particularly was the fact that we have an industrial park next door, and Graham Goldsmith is right. It's a very good one. It's well designed, it's well thought out, it's got at least a focus now on food rather than maybe a number of other things. All that's to the good. So why are we in this problem? You've done a good job. You've got a good tenant. They make good beer. They've got a good business. They want to expand. The expansion doesn't seem to be the problem for anybody. What is beginning to bother the neighbors, though, is the fact that, quote, food service, restaurant, concerts, noise, things going on late at night, things that are not normally going on in an industrial park, which is what you've got. So the thing that really drove this all home, going back as I went back, well, coming at this at the first time, looking at the history, seeing what went on, and reading about they're going to be a food service. Well, you've got a whole bunch of people in there, and yes, probably a cafeteria for the workers is a good idea. Want to run it from 6 to 6? That seems reasonable. That's the hours that people work. You can feed your staff. They can have breakfast. They can go to work. They can have lunch. There's a place to do that. It's a glorified lunchroom. That's the 2,000 square feet that I believe he was talking about. Now, that somehow seems to have morphed over with this business of concerts. And all of a sudden, they wanted to change the time from 6 to 10, and everybody backed off to 6 to 9. But what you're doing is you're turning the, quote, cafeteria to serve sandwiches, lunch snacks, and things to the workers into some place that is going to be open maybe lunchtime and later, serving some kind of food, undefined, all the way till 10 o'clock 9 or 10 o'clock at night. That definitely moves it away from the, quote, food service cafeteria into something that looks and smells and feels like a restaurant. You complicate this with the Fiddlehead having a concert, I think it must be now about 6 weeks ago, but it was early in the spring, and the noise that came out of that place at all afternoon, from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night, was really noisy. I mean, there was music, and there was a very loud bass, and it was also a foggy and not very nice day. So you could escape. We could go inside. But if that was a nice sunny afternoon, that was the end of it. So you've done yourself no favors by the way you've presented all of this. So my instinct is that this is a problem for the Gables. It's a problem for the noise, and it's a problem potentially for the music. It's not a problem for having a brewery. It's not a problem for having a good industrial park. So I think that what I'm saying on behalf of me, and I do not speak for the board, and by the way, the board letter that they agreed to, I disagreed to with the day they made it. So I do think it's important that you get this thing into a box and shut the box quickly. And my instinct is that the Gables residents who aren't happy with the noise are not going to go away if this is going to be something that's as noisy as zero gravity restaurant on a Friday night. And I think I've made that point. You didn't do yourself any favors by not coming here sooner.
Well, I don't want to hog the mic here, but I just wanted to say that to put things in perspective, and Matt's not here, I'm just saying what I know. Matt has been in that project for 1,100 days. He's had 3 events. They all closed by 7. So it's not like it's been a constant thing that's been a problem. And so I don't think that the food service is necessarily equated to loud noise and late night activity. As I said, these things were over by 7. And I don't know where you go from here, because if we start restricting this, and with all due respect, you do live next to an industrial zone, but where do we stop? Recently there was a concert and there was an event and there was fireworks till 10:30 at night down at the Teddy Bear Factory. And all of a sudden, if we set this precedent, we're going to say that we can't have concerts at the Shelburne Museum? I mean, that's probably not a good thing if that were to happen. So I think, again, we're not here. We're not asking about the special events, which I know you have a concern about. We're simply asking 2 things. We want to know If we can add the food service to 9 o'clock so we can have a viable business there, then get somebody to actually do it. Whether it's Matt or not, I just can't begin to get somebody to come in there that's going to close at 6. And we want to be able to expand the buildings. That is the biggest issue. So for us, if we can't get expansion of those buildings, we're really getting into a corner here. And to be honest with you, I have found that the review of a lot of the tenants that we've tried to get in there has been very difficult. We've had a number of tenants that we thought would be appropriate to be there, and the town staff has said, no, you can't do that. And it's getting to be harder and harder to make this thing work. And if we're trying to raise taxes, if we're trying to have clean business, if we're trying to have a place that's attractive and a fun place for people to go, we got to have some kind of flexibility. I'll leave it at that.
I'm Peter Regan. I live at 119 Covington Lane, The Gables, and I've lived there for about 10 years. And I was on the board of The Gables. I'm sorry?
Speak into that.
And I was on the board of The Gables when we started negotiation, Ann and I and others, and we had very good meeting with Graham, as he's pointed out, back in 2014, and we signed that letter shortly thereafter, the first letter, which clearly outlines most of what Graham has mentioned, and the project has gone forward very well, and the screening and the planning and the relationship of The Gables and the Shelburne Green has been very good. Then those letters closed. The letter closed work in 2014. The Act 250 permit was issued, and things were fairly quiet until December of 2017, when out of the blue, another application came to meld these two buildings together to create the necessary space, square footage for a larger food service location, because before it was so much per building. And secondly, to increase the ancillary food service till 9 o'clock. Now, Graham's son, Graham Jr., who worked on this project quite a bit, I can remember him standing over by that wall. This would have been maybe 15 or 16, discussing the location and the hours of the food service and the nature of it. And I can remember the people from the Gables particularly asking him about outside people coming in versus employees. And he repeated several times, this is going to be ancillary food service for the manufacturing, primarily for the employees. There'll be no sign out on the road. It's not going to be a restaurant. Now, as we heard, it's going to move towards a restaurant. There's no question about it. Graham has pointed out that the Mr. Cohen from the brewery has requested this, but this project started in 2012. That's the first time we had a meeting with Dave, and it's gone a long time. And all of a sudden, Graham is taking the position that Cohen is going to move up to Williston or something. He's got a wonderful brewery going there. He's got a wonderful food service right on Route 7, which is within the town plan. And they recently expanded it right next to Felino's. They recently increased their parking for their restaurant so they can use the parking up at Shelburne Green. And now we hear that they're going to close the whole brewery if they can't move that food service up next to the Gables. I just don't understand this. And secondly, I would like to read from the meetings, from the Ravi's report dated August 21, not for this meeting. I'm not sure the date of it, a week ago or so. And he discusses at length the location of the food service. As I also read the notes at the last meeting in July, one of the open questions was the location, and Ravi was charged to bring this forward to the board. Now we've heard that it's not on the agenda tonight. And so I have a question of what happened. Ravi did bring it forth in his report here, and what he says is at this point, staff suggests the board takes no action on the permit condition regarding the location. Staff is aware of the implicit contradiction of the permit conditions if DRB chooses to keep both permit conditions open. That is the conflict between the 2014 permit, which restricted the location, and the current. Now, he further goes on to say, the permit condition from the final plan review approval would clash with the ability to put an accessory food service in Building 6 if the accessory food service would be east of the north-south drive. In the case presently before the DRB, the accessory food service use would be. However, the applicant has not requested any changes to the permit conditions regarding the location of the accessory food service. To modify the permit conditions for items outside the DRB scope of review is not advised. Now, this is just opening the door for a heavy-handed push to settle this conflict. And I understand Mr. Day points out that you have a procedural problem here, but I think you're going to have a bigger problem if you close this tonight and close it, leaving this location question open, which was brought forward at the last meeting, and Ravi was charged, and he did address this. I think it's a major risk, and it's interesting that the applicant was the one that requested that it not be included in this meeting tonight, and that surprises me, and that you allowed that. So that's what I have to say.
Can I try to help clarify this position? Only if you're holding a microphone. Okay, this is a composite drawing showing what was originally approved and what we're doing now. And what the original permit said, that we were not going to have a food service in buildings 7, 8, and 12. We're not putting one in 7, 8, or 12. This is building 6, the position of old building number 6. This is the north-south parking lot. This is the east-west parking lot. This is a position, if you read what was said in the approval, that would allow for that cafe to be there. So that was always the position that we thought it could be. Add to that all the things I've talked about trying to mitigate if you had a concern about that. We have put a massive building around it, encased it, a big high wall behind it, painted dark green, no access back there. So Peter, I do think that we did cover, it is in an acceptable location. And as far as the, again, we're not asking for the additional, not concerts or events. We're not asking about that right now, but keep in mind the things were over by 7 o'clock. It wasn't like it wasn't going late into the night. It wasn't like they were there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. 7 o'clock it was over. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Other people who haven't commented yet? Yeah. Could somebody hand the lady a microphone, please? We could have stereo.
I don't know how to do it, too. I'm Ann Powell. I live at 117 Covington Lane, and I want you to know I am not speaking as a board member at this point. I'm speaking as myself. And I want to assure Mr. Graham that the Gables has appreciated a lot of the negotiating and so on that has gone on over the many years. As Peter said, I was also on the board back at the first go-round on this. And we worked very hard at that time with, as it was, Graham Jr., to limit the hours that any food service would be open. My memory is the same, that it was presented as a food service for the people who worked there, and that was why it was set from 6 to 6. And then we move on to 2017, 2018, now 2019, and we are all, I think, most of us have said, we congratulate Fiddlehead on their success. We're not arguing with them being there. And as I understand it, from reading what the staff report is and so on, there is no disagreement about, perhaps, at least staff recommendation, about combining those 3 buildings for Fiddlehead. So I don't completely understand why Matt Cohen is, I'll use the word, threatening to leave. It seems to be more over the food service. So it went from 6 to 6 back in the olden days, and then when this new one came up, it was first proposed for 10 to 10. And again, we had some concerns about that. We did a lot of meetings. Norm would confirm that. Lots of time spent. And we finally got an agreement, at least, that food service itself would not go past 9. That didn't necessarily mean we were all crazy about it, but that was the agreement that the board at that time, 5-member board, came to with them. My question is whether, if the DRB does not agree to, well, then we had the last time around, it switched from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock, end of food service. Now tonight, this is the question I came with at the beginning of this, was what hours are being looked at? Because it's been very confusing. But my question, bottom line, is if the board, DRB, and the town approve the 3 buildings being combined, then is Fiddlehead, and I guess particularly Matt Cohen, if the board said, no, we're not going to give you all the way till 9 or 10, is he going to pull the stakes then? I mean, is it that important? It's interesting that nobody wants to run it if it closes at 6 o'clock. That seems to me to be sort of a hint about things. But I'm feeling like there's been a lot thrown around here that's sort of threats, not only toward you, the town, us, whatever, because for the greatest part, I certainly support this. It's a good development.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that we do have an agreement with you, which we signed February 6, 2019. So I thought we were all set on this. But it's not a threat about the food service. It's not a threat at all. It's just a matter, the guy cannot make any more beer. He's got all these orders from New Hampshire and Rhode Island. If he can't expand his business, he's already moved 6,000 square feet to Williston. He says, Graham, I just can't wait any longer. It's been 2 years. We want to get, the biggest issue is being able to get that building over there. Now, I'm surprised we're having this conversation because we talked about the food service and we agreed on all of the terms of this, which we submitted to you and you signed and we've given to the town. So I don't know what else to say. I thought we were in agreement on that.
I'm just asking a procedural question, and if there isn't a 2-word answer, then forget that I asked it. I'm assuming you're on, the two of you are I should really be addressing you as counsel. I'm assuming that your client is unwilling to sever the 2 issues, the food service and the building expansion.
He's asked me a question I'd like to answer. What we really want is a decision. And we
On-
think
on
it's-
both?
On both. I mean, we need to plan going forward. And the most critical thing that we leave you, whatever decision you need to make, we just would ask you to make it quickly. Tell us now whether you're going to approve the expansion and approve the food service use so that we can move forward. What we can't do is have a situation where you have a deliberative session in 2 weeks, you direct staff to write a decision, comes out in 45 days, there's 30 days of appeal period beyond that, because by that point, we will have lost the tenant for whatever reason. We'd rather know now whether you say no or say yes. That's the most important thing. How you, whatever your decision is your decision. But we need and would really encourage you, after close the hearing tonight, sit and make a decision, and then have it, even if it's the writing of it is directing staff to produce a written decision within a short period of time. But if we know, then we can plan. And that's always the problem with every business. They need to plan. And right now, you can't, if you bifurcated it, you can't plan that building because there's a hole in the middle. And you're going to fill that hole differently and design it and build it differently if you think there's a food service in there or if you're not. Sorry, that was longer than a two-word answer.
Just try to get a mic to you.
Oh, yes, I'm.
Could I just say one thing?
Everybody else had one shot before I was focused.
Very courteous of you. Is there anyone else wants to speak before we go back to Graham? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ann Knowlton, and I live at 121 Covington Lane.
Was she part of the mass swearing?
Yes,
Okay.
121 Covington Lane, Ann Knowlton. Mr. Gradstead, Goldsmith, I don't understand why Mr. Cohen can't make money without the cafe. If he's making money there, then why are we all so upset over this? Does he really need a cafe in order to make money? I'm sure if he has these contracts in New York City and New Hampshire and different areas, that he's making money. So why in the world would this cafe hold him up? I don't understand that. It seems to me it's more your design that you're concerned about.
Well, I think that as I said before, by far the biggest issue is the ability to continue to make his product. That's his biggest issue. His dream, and I thought it was a dream that we had, and I thought we had an agreement with the town that we were able to have a food service there. I don't know whether we do anymore, but I'm trying to find a way to make this thing work. I don't understand why there's such an aversion to having a place, a food service for people to be able to go that live and that work in this project. And if somebody comes to the project and they buy some products at the different businesses, why they couldn't go over and get something to eat there. I mean, it's not a full service. It's not waiters and waitresses. It's walk in, walk up to a counter, look at a menu on the board, get a salad, whatever it is, sit down and eat. But we tried to get somebody to come there, and I would think that the people at the Gables would love to have a place to go, other than. Okay, well, you don't know till you see it, but anyway.
He's already done it.
What?
I promised the gentleman in the back the next shot at a mic.
That has nothing to do with us. That has nothing to do with my project. Yeah.
Hey, whoa. Matt in the back is the next guy with a mic. Okay.
I have some comments that I will give you a copy of in writing when I finish, and I'll give the applicant copies as well. I do want to start by saying that we did in fact have a conversation with Graham and Norm about the buffer area and improvements to the buffer area, but it's been decided that that's not before the board, although it would seem to me that the applicant began to and could actually modify their request to put those things in. But basically, my impetus for writing the memo tonight was Liam Murphy's letter, and I just felt that the conclusions in that letter and adding that letter to the record just needed to be responded to. So we want to address the July 31 letter submitted by Liam Murphy regarding the scope of your final hearing review of this application. In his letter, Liam states that the applicant therefore believes that the only issue that should be addressed at the reconvened hearing regarding the change in hours of the accessory food use from 6 to 9. Among the matters Mr. Murphy instructs you not to take up is the scope of the food service. He says that the food service has already been approved and such use is not now subject to reconsideration. He goes on to state that the board did not address or limit the nature or characteristics of the food service, and the board cannot do so now. Fortunately, Mr. Murphy's position is contrary to the plain language of the preliminary approval. As staff points out in staff notes for tonight's hearing, the DRB concluded that an accessory food service in conjunction with the manufacturing operation of Fiddlehead Brewing Company may be added as a legitimate accessory food service use. And Mr. Hillman emphasized that earlier. Clearly, the scope of the food service is still on the table for tonight's hearing and is an item for the board to address in a subsequent decision. Having been told by Mr. Murphy that the current food service cannot be limited in any way, the discussion of the nature of the food service becomes moot. If the food service cannot be limited in any way, then the town lacks the authority to keep it from being a restaurant, and therefore it must be considered as such. Therefore, the town must turn down the additional hours of operation proposed. We would also note that the applicant has suggested that Fiddlehead may not be operating the food service. If the food service becomes a separate business, it clearly surpasses the category of auxiliary and becomes its own primary use, and staff has suggested that as well. Mr. Murphy further instructs that the board cannot consider the location of the food service. This assertion is incorrect. The site plans, which are part of the application, clearly show a new location for the proposed food service, which differs from the current approvals. The board instructed staff to research this issue, and they have done so. As has been pointed out by staff, it would be problematic for the board to be silent on the issue of the food service location, having discovered the conflict that exists between the current application and the prior approval. Final hearing is an appropriate venue to harmonize permit conditions, and the board should do so. Mr. Murphy also expresses the sentiment that it is somehow unfair for the issue of the food service location to be raised at this, quote, late date, unquote. However, given the choice between closing the record at the July 17th hearing and having a continuance to tonight, the applicant chose the continuance, providing the opportunity for the staff to research the issue. The applicant cannot now instruct the board to ignore the research that the hearing was continued to conduct. Finally, Mr. Murphy states that the application is not seeking approval for special events. However, this assertion is contradicted by both written and oral testimony by other representatives of the applicant. The applicant has submitted a written agreement executed by the adjoining Gables Condominium Association regarding up to 4 special events a year, with music stopping at 7 p.m. Reviewing the recording of the July 17 DRB meeting, the board specifically asked if the applicant was planning to conduct such events, and Norm, on behalf of the applicant, answered in the affirmative. Additionally, in prior hearings, the applicant and the board have discussed the authority under which Shelburne Vineyard and Shelburne Museum conduct special events. Staff has pointed out that these two organizations operate in different zoning districts. And staff has pointed out that the light manufacturing district in which Shelburne Green exists, there are no provisions to accommodate requests for special events at this time. Once entered into the record voluntarily by the applicant, the testimony and exhibits regarding special events should not be ignored by the board. At minimum, the board should find that the applicant withdrew their request, and it sounds like they did tonight. They withdrew their request for approval of special events, and therefore none are currently authorized. I've got copies of this for the board and anyone else that would like to have a copy. And I want to emphasize that, like others in the Gables and others in the community of Shelburne, I have a great deal of respect for the quality of this subdivision. I have a great deal of respect for the businesses that are operating there. I have a total respect for Graham's vision in bringing this to Shelburne. And we find ourselves coming down to what I hope is a very narrow issue. And I would encourage you to provide the approvals necessary for Fiddlehead to continue on in this development. And I would assert that the zoning provides no basis whatsoever for you to permit a restaurant in this location. And Mr. Murphy has made it clear that in his professional opinion, you have no right to limit what they do there. In other words, you have no right to condition it so it can't be a restaurant.
I'm not going to respond to that substantively with one exception. When the board explicitly declines to decide something, that doesn't give any party on either side of the issue any rights. It says that the issue is not decided by the board. There is no default position that allows either party to proceed. And each party decides to proceed or not at their risk because the matter isn't decided. So, and I say that not to be argumentative with a letter, but to avoid the impression that if the board says it is not deciding A, that permits either party to proceed with their version of what the answer to A is.
Well, I do appreciate you letting me share this material.
Oh, of course.
I do hope you'll, as Mr. Murphy has asked, give them a hasty decision and hopefully provide an avenue for this excellent business to expand.
Well, I hope we can give them a fast decision. I'm not sure a hasty one is the one that the circumstances deserve.
I have one question, clarification of what you just said.
Mike.
Can there be an additional meeting, or is this, by your rules, the last meeting of this application or whatever?
The board decides that as a board at the end of each matter when a member makes a motion to close the record, which is usually the first part of any dispositive motion at the end of a proceeding. When the record is closed, then that means there is no more evidence or exhibits or testimony that is admissible in that matter. And the only part of the process that is left is for the board to make a substantive decision. The board can do that either by simply voting immediately, or they can make it after a deliberative session, which can occur immediately after the meeting, or at some future date. Those decisions are also made by the board, not by the chair or acting chair. They are made by the board as a whole.
Could there be a second meeting? I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
If there is no, now I'm not speaking for the board, or as chair, I'm just speaking personally. If there is no one who has additional evidence or testimony they want to give, then that is usually the place in a hearing where the record is closed.
I see.
And once the record is closed,
I
if anybody
understand that.
changes their mind later on, it's too late.
Yeah. But,
In the time I've been on the board, I'm unaware of any matter being closed while there was someone in the room wishing to give evidence.
Mr. Chair, just some final, hopefully final wrapping up points that I want to address. The application is not seeking any approval of any concerts. I think the issues that the neighbors are raising are ones for the town to discuss with the select board and other bodies about whether and on what circumstances events at facilities should be decided. Second, in light of the number of discussions that about the location, which I thought we weren't going to discuss, I feel I have to just give the board information that supports our view that that issue is not before the board, and that is your preliminary decision. The preliminary decision references the maps that were submitted in the preliminary hearing. And those maps include the maps that Graham has shown here on the big board. Those maps indicate the north-south road. They're very clear. The preliminary decision was based upon those maps. They're referenced, and the board came to a final decision on this issue, which was not appealed. And that. Oh, of course. Sorry. I thought I gave enough. Okay. I apologize. I thought I had given. If you look at the last page of the decision itself, Condition 4. There is a decision made already by the board as to where the food service would be located. That decision was not appealed. There is nothing else to be said, and that's why we're confident that we don't need to discuss it. It says the location of the accessory food service use is restricted to Building 6, as shown on the floor plans. So the board saw the plans that included the north-south roadway description and made a decision already. So that decision is closed. The final thing I want to say is, as we've indicated, we would like you to make a decision. But I am concerned about the proposed motions that staff has included in your package, in his staff report. I've always believed that staff have a job of being supportive of the board and providing the board with unbiased options. Unfortunately, all the motions, none of the motions, including the motions for approval that were given to you, suggest any approval of the 6 to 9 hour condition. There are a lot of other conditions in there. There's 2 denials. There's 1 approval, but specifically excluding that. But the staff did not give you an option for a motion that included a condition approving the times from 6 to 9. So as you're looking at it, I would just like you to keep that.
Your concern for what may appear to be lack of completeness. I'm sure, as you understand, the staff motions are purely advisory, and although
Right. And my only
it's not
reason for
uncommon
pointing
for
it
us
out-
to adopt some of them verbatim, it is also not uncommon for us to change them substantially or just make different motions.
No, I understand, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that if you were looking at them and completely, that the two approval motions, if that's what you choose to do not include an approval of the hours from 6 to 9. Thank you.
I have one procedural. Oh, I'm sorry.
And then you're after him. That's okay. It's you.
Hello, Ken Albert. What I'm listening to, I guess I can't stand there, I'll be blinded. I'm listening to the back and forth here between the residents and some of the relatives of the residents and the board, and I'm fearful of a train wreck here. If you look at us from the point of view of Shelburne, this is a fantastic development. I think no one disagrees with that. When we wrote the regulations for this piece of land, I guess it was in the 80s. I can't recall the exact date, someplace in the 80s. We envisioned IBM or XYZ going in there and building something, and someone else would sell it elsewhere. That's not the kind of world we live in today. The world we live in today, for it to be viable in Vermont, we need these vertically integrated entities, which means from the beginning of the product all the way to the end of the product. And that includes the consumer coming on the site and utilizing all the available features of the site. I mean, we're doing the same thing at Shelburne Vineyard across the street. And by the way, I never heard anyone complain about the music coming out from Shelburne Vineyard. And the probability is the sound effect that you will get from us, or you have received from us, versus what you will receive if this development goes as the applicant has proposed, would be identical. You will hear zero. And because they're even more buffered than we are, we do not have, don't say no, don't say no. You do not, we do not have the buffers that these people are putting in with considerable effort. So my concern is we've got this older regulation, which people are now trying to use to basically prevent this thing from going forward. Sometimes the enemy you know is better than the enemy you don't know. If this thing fails tonight, ultimately something is going to go in there with exactly what they're proposing today. The concern is this is here now. I think the rest of the town is very much in favor and desirous of this thing. And so we've got to find a way to get this thing to be successful. And I just don't know what to do. Now, it looks like they need the square footage. Do they need the restaurant right away? God knows. I don't know where Matt Cohen is at this point in time. But I just think that we've got to avoid a train wreck here and avoid people on the other side, once something is approved, appealing and delaying it for God knows how many 360-day periods of time. So all I say is let's see if we can work to make this thing happen, because this is the only kind of viable development that is feasible in the state of Vermont today. And this is a development that's done with care and excellence. And up to date, there's been virtually no noise from that thing except for one or two errant events. And I would suggest that events from Shelburne Vineyard would have the same effect as events from here. So hopefully there's a way that you can find to make this thing successful, because it would be basically town suicide to basically lose what is this particular proposal.
I need to say one thing in response to what Ken did say there, which is, although I myself personally have not heard the music, the noise, the whatever, I know that a number of the residents at the Gables who live closer to that have definitely reported, Ian being one of them, and number of other people. So, and we do periodically, I believe, hear some of the sounds from the vineyard, but it tends to be a slightly different kind of sound, and I think it doesn't usually go on as long. However, that's not.
I beg your pardon. Ours go on well.
She's got the mic at this point.
The question I wanted to ask, do I understand that you could, in your decision, basically separate the two things? You could approve, for example, combining all three of the buildings, but not approve the change in hours? Or vice versa, if you chose to do so.
The short answer is yes. So we have two requests before us, and we can decide them concurrent. We can decide them any way we want.
Because I don't think you've heard anybody from the Gables speak specifically about don't combine the buildings so that Fiddlehead can be that much bigger. And I know that part of what they're going to use Building 6 for is warehousing and possibly some more, not exactly production, but part of the business as well. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify one thing, and that is, if you're hearing noise currently, if you did hear noise, I know it was over by 7, we haven't been able to affect the buffer yet. The buildings are going to be in there. Some of those back of the buildings are exactly 20 feet plus high, solid across there, almost all the way across. And you add all the planting we're putting in there and all that buffering, it's going to make a big difference. In addition, the building, the actual food service was tucked in on the west side of the building. So just keep that in mind. And right now, if you hear something, you're looking and hearing it right down in there without the buffering, and it's wide open. So I just wanted you to understand that piece.
But we're not talking about concerts, right?
Okay, whatever.
Then you're next.
I want to do this as efficiently as I can, so I'll ask the chair for some advice. Oh, I'm sorry. Was he?
No, you're first. You're first.
We in the neighborhood wanted to submit into the evidence a letter that recently appeared in the Shelburne News. My father-in-law was a retired judge, and he always said that he always hated it when the wrong party won because they didn't get their case in. And so even though this was in the community newspaper.
Do you know whether this is in the online version too?
It's letters to the editor, August 15. It's a letter by Lynn Pruitt. I can read it into the record or not.
Good.
If for efficiency you want me to give it to Ravi to copy for the record.
I think just giving it to Ravi is fine because it's from a public source that we can all access, and there's no question about the contents. So you can read it if you feel a need to. If you want to summarize it, that's fine.
No, it's just a resident of the Davis Park area talking about what a wonderful community Shelburne is, and seeing this restaurant thing as a slippery slope. So I'm very respectful of what this developer has been doing in this location. And so, but this talks about Shelburne as a community and how this may fit into community life.
That's fine. No problem with admissibility.
Just put it in.
Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I skip somebody? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. She hasn't spoken yet. No, that's fine. You haven't spoken yet, so you're up.
Go ahead.
My name is Jane Knowlton, and I live at 121 Covington Lane in the Gables also. And I just wanted to make a few comments. I've attended a number of these meetings over the years, and I've heard people talk about Act 250 and the compliance, the wetlands and the fire hazard, changes in the water table. And I know those are off the issue right now, but I haven't heard answers to those. And so if that's part of your deliberation, I would encourage you to look at that. I think the industrial park mission is very clear, and I, like the others, I applaud its development and its progress and its success. And I wish Fiddlehead all the success in the world. And I echo what Ann Powell has said about their development. And I think I echo the sentiment that most of the people, all the people that I know in the Gables, are encouraged about that. However, with the restaurant, I do have a lot of reservations, and I would not like to see it extended past 6 p.m. because for many reasons. There are other restaurants in the area. There's Harrington's that closes at 5. There's Village Wine that closes at 6. There are places that are available. There's Felino's right down the road. So there are other places that people can go. They haven't been limited. They've been in existence. They've had success. So there's nothing holding people back from eating in the area and close to the area. Maybe in the future something will develop. Maybe they'll get somebody who has a better proposal. Maybe they haven't just had the right proposal to come in there. But if Harrington's can be a success and Village Wine can be a success, certainly they can have somebody that comes in and develops something. And maybe they have a proposal that will bring them to Route 7, closer to Route 7, where the parking is better and the noise won't carry as far, and they can develop something with Shelburne Vineyard. I mean, there's a joint venture idea there that they could pursue. So I don't think everything's been turned over in terms of what can be looked at for the future. And I have walked that area. I've seen cigarette butts out there. My concern are car doors slamming, cigarette butts that can light. The cattails that are in that area back there could catch fire very easily. And the noise does carry. I did go to a concert. In fact, I went over to the concert one day when they were having one, and it was past the hours. They said they started late and they wanted to continue to go late. And I said, you got a lot of older people there that are really trying to, I could hear it inside the house with the doors closed, and the house rocked, just rocked. So that's a separate issue, and I understand the town will get involved with that. But when you have food and you have alcohol, people party. And to think that you would have something open till 9 p.m. at night and you wouldn't have those issues just isn't realistic. So I think the letter to the editor that Clark mentioned bears a lot of thought, and I appreciate the fact that the woman wrote that. I think they have every reason to have success in their industrial park. And I appreciate Mr. Hillman's comments about what is a restaurant. And I think I would encourage you to reflect on that. Thank you.
Hopefully this will be the last comment. I can see the eyelids on the board beginning to go to half-mast. But quickly, at the present time, Fiddlehead operates exactly what it's talking about doing here in the original Fiddlehead Brewery. They moved the machinery out when they built the new building, and they turned that into a restaurant. It has a fairly extensive but limited menu. It's picnic tables around the side. It serves a lot of people. People come in at lunchtime, and they no longer go to Felino's, they go into the Fiddlehead space. So Fiddlehead has what they need in the right now. So giving Fiddlehead the permission to build the buildings, get this building up and do what they want to do and stop all this nonsense going on, and just basically say no food service for the moment, and let that come back at some point. But because they have some place to go, and if that is the thing that breaks the deal, there's something else a lot bigger than just the food service. There's something else going on. So I think you've got a note. You can approve something, get it going, and the food service goes off into the horizon because they've already got something.
Okay, any more public comments? This is the last.
Really? Clark, Graham and Clark raised the issue about a fence between the buffer zone and the buildings, and I guess as the applicant would be open to a condition, should the board decide to impose one, to have a 4-foot high wire fence on the west side of the buffer.
I'm not commenting on the desirability of the idea, but I don't think you can go both ways at once. We either limit the decision to the hours and the building, or we address all the conditions. I don't think there's a middle ground.
I want to just put on the record that we're open to that condition. We're open to it. There's a plan showing right.
Yeah, well, with all due respect, I don't think you can bargain with the DRB. That, regardless of your point of view, we're going to call balls and strikes as we see them. And we can't say, well, because they're flexible and they might do this or they might not do this. I mean, that's not a privilege that I think we have as a board. I'm going to do my own height.
You have a question, Mrs. Thomas?
Yes, good evening.
Yeah.
I'm the property manager at Shelburne Green, and I just think that there's a few things that I need to clarify. I'm the person that has the daily interaction with Matt Cohen. And originally Matt came to me a little over 2 years ago and he said, Norm, we need some more space. We're busting at the seams. So we signed a letter of intent at that point to give him about another 8,000 square feet to max out as 20,000 square feet for the original approval for not to exceed 20,000 square feet. By the time the ink had started to dry on that letter of intent, Matt said, Norm, I have a problem. I need more space than that. So that's when we came in and we started this process. Most recently, Matt has called me into his office numerous times and he said, Norm, what are we going to do? He says, this is my problem. He said, I cannot brew one more ounce of beer in the facility that I'm in. This fall, we are going to be opening the New Hampshire market and the Rhode Island market, and we have no beer to provide them. And he said, I don't know what to do. He said, you keep promising me this is going to happen, it's going to happen, but here we are 2 years later. So he said, I want you to understand something, Norm. I have been forced to rent 5,000 or 6,000 square feet in the town of Williston. They have available to me enough space to move my entire operation without any further permitting whatsoever. So what I'm asking you this evening, I, as the representative of Shelburne Green, as the property manager, my job is to take care of my tenants, alongside the job to take care of the owner of the project. So I'm trying to twofold and make this all happen. At the end of the day, I feel that Matt was very straightforward with me, and he made it very clear. So unfortunately, even though we would like an immediate decision on the extended size up to 40,000 square feet in the hours of operation, if there's any likelihood or possibility that the cafe extended hours are going to affect the decision of the timeline of the expansion of this building, I would ask the board to please separate them items, okay? And what then, I would also ask the board if they could please make an expedient decision on the expansion up to the 40,000 square feet. And I would further ask town staff, because of the fact there is no such regulation, if in fact the DRB was to make a positive recommendation on the expansion of up to the 40,000 square feet, if at the 15th day of the 30-day appeal period for the DRB, if staff could issue a building permit and the balance of the 15-day on the appeal period left on the DRB decision in the 15-day appeal period for the building permit, them two appeal periods to run simultaneous together. What that would do is that would clearly help me with trying to convince Matt that this is all good and we're going to get this project rolling and we're going to get the foundations in before winter, so on and so forth. So this is not meant by any way, shape, or form to be a threat. Unfortunately, Matt cannot grow his business where he's at. So I need to do, as property manager, my job is to try to keep the existing tenants that we have and to also add new tenants to the complex. So that's my feeling on this, and I'm hoping that the owner of the property will agree with me, but I'm the person that has that daily interaction with Matt Cohen, and that is how serious of a situation we have on our hands. Thank you very much.
Comment on that, Robbie, from a procedural point of view?
So that's actually standard practice. So we know that applicants are on a time crunch. So for DRB decisions, for any board decisions, we try to minimize the amount of time that is spent. So we try to overlap appeal periods so that way they expire at the same time. But if action is taken on one or the other permit, then appeal action is taken, and we understand that as well. But yeah, we understand that time is money for our developers and for people just working on small projects, and we try to accommodate that as much as possible.
Council, the board has received what I'll characterize as a suggestion that we consider the possibility we bifurcate the two elements of the request. How say you?
I think that's within the board's authority to make two independent decisions if you choose. But I think you start to make the decisions within the period of time that you can choose to make an initial decision and then.
I may have misunderstood the request, but so I'll just say out loud how I understood it, and if I misunderstood it, please, I'm hoping the property manager will correct me. My understanding is that the request was if the resolution, one way or the other, of the food court is going to delay the building expansion piece, please decide the building expansion piece now and address the food court later. That's what I understood his suggestion to be, and I'm asking you to agree, disagree, or be neutral on that.
I believe that's within the board's authority to make.
As owner of the building, the project, I'm okay with that.
No, but legally, I think the board could close the hearing.
I have no question about what our legal authority is. I just wanted to get your input before we exercised it.
I'm ready to make a motion for there.
For what?
Yeah, I think we need.
We've been around this.
Yeah,
Around this and around this. Exactly.
It seems
Just
the easy part.
Yeah.
And
But what are we gonna make a decision?
Yeah, staff recommends at this point, because of how much information there is, maybe you should just close the hearing and then deliberate on the material that you have.
How can we keep closing hearings and moving on? I thought we walked into this. Oh, well, I know we have to close it because I'm getting increasingly hungry, but the point I'm making is, I thought we started, there were two decisions we came to make. And now we're saying we don't even want to make a motion on those?
Well, how about procedurally, and this is a suggestion, I'm not speaking as acting chair. How about closing the record and having a deliberative session right here and now and see if we can rapidly reach a resolution on something. We don't need to agree on what the something is or what the resolution is.
I think that
that might achieve at least some action tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I'll say out loud for everybody else's benefit, but I'm over my head on this, Ravi, so please correct me. My understanding is when we have a deliberative session and the board reaches a consensus, that we don't have to call an additional public meeting to vote on it. We can actually go straight to a draft decision. Is that correct?
So, yes. Just trying to wrap my head around this. So once you close a hearing, you can hold a deliberative session. at your convenience. However, you have to have a decision issued within 45 days of when you close the hearing.
But we need no further public hearing. We can,
No.
at the conclusion or in any
Yes.
part of the deliberative session, we can make the
Yes.
decision.
Yes.
Okay, we're done. So I would appreciate a motion to close the record and to have the board enter a deliberative session now.
I would like to make a motion to finalize the record, close the hearing, and pursue deliberative hearings now.
I second that.
All those in favor? Unanimous. Get out of here. That's slang. Deliberative sessions, everybody has to be excluded from the room.
Are you announcing a conclusion tonight?
That presumes that we make one, and that presumes that we make one tonight.
Make one tonight, will you be announcing it tonight?
I don't think we normally announce them publicly. Robbie will absolutely know tonight if we make a decision tonight.